Welcome to California in Focus. I'm managing editor Cole Lauterbach with the Center Square. Today we'll be discussing a Los Angeles audit finding 1/4 of the shelter beds in the city empty every night, resulting in a loss of hundreds of millions of dollars. Joining me today is Center Square reporter Kenneth Schrupp. Kenneth, why on earth are all of these beds sitting empty when you have tens of thousands of homeless people on the streets in Los Angeles alone, let alone the county?
Hey, Cole. Los Angeles has about 3,200 empty beds each night, which is enough to house more than 1 in 10 of the city's 30,000 unsheltered homeless individuals every night. That's also about the same as 3/4 the number of unsheltered homeless that San Francisco has in total. And when we look at disparities between congregate and non-congregate shelters, some of the reasons why we have a low vacancy rate come into effect. So-called congregate shelters, where there's a large number of people sheltered in one common room, have much lower vacancy rates than non-congregate shelters, where you get a private room often. These private shelters, where you get your own space, had an 86% occupancy rate, while congregate shelters had a 65% occupancy rate. This means that it seems that people just don't want to go often into these congregate shelters. It's understandable if a lot of people have mental illness or are violent. People just might not want to be in shared spaces with other people who might be a threat to them. These private shelters, though, are much more expensive. They cost about $57,000 per bed compared to regular congregate shelters, $29,000 per bed. But combined, these are still causing massive losses to the tune of over $200 million between 2019 and 2023 in just unused shelter beds.
Now, you mentioned there's a lot of homeless in Los Angeles and the Los Angeles area that could take these beds. And we've touched on this before. It's called service resistant homeless, I believe the term was. Are local officials blaming that phenomenon on this vacancy issue?
First, let's look at what the city controller is blaming. The city controller blames city council members for reserving spaces in the homeless system to carry out encampment sweeps and cleanups. When a sweep is done for an area that's been designated as somewhere people can't camp, such as next to a school or a library, city council members will reserve space for those individuals so that when the police tell them they got to go, they have somewhere to go. But this is a newer program, or at least the expansion is newer, and there's a lot of data from before this expansion that also showed high vacancy rates. So it's not clear that this is really a cause. I think that it comes down to the difference in preference between wanting to be in a shared large room with a large number of other homeless individuals compared to being able to have a private space, or if one is especially lucky, being able to get a 100% taxpayer funded apartment for life.
And that's been a point of contention, but also a bragging point for Mayor Bass in saying that, there's a ton of, a record number of these new housing units that are taxpayer funded. These people that live in these will never have to pay for them.
That's right. The city says that it funds 29,554 vouchers with taxpayer money for permanent supportive housing for homeless individuals. And these vouchers for one-bedroom apartments are $2,400, which covers the entire cost of the home. This is probably a part of the reason why 45% of homeless in LA are so-called service-resistant individuals who refuse free services offered to them by city-hired contractors or the city itself.
Now, the policy of having open beds and having them reserved as placeholders so that when police sweep encampments, they're able to send someone somewhere appears, that to me, it sounds like a vestige from the previous legal environment before grants pass. The decision that said, yeah, if you send off somebody, if you clear an encampment, if you take a homeless person off of a bench, You must have a place to put them. Otherwise, it's inhumane. And that was, the point up to them, but it was reversed. And now the Supreme Court of the United States has said that you no longer need that. Has there been any conversation around that reasoning to stop this odd reserved? I mean, you've got homeless shelters with reserve signs on them. Sorry, you can't stay here.
So first of all, I want to say that I've been looking at some of these vacancy numbers for quite some time. I remember seeing vacancy even during the middle of winter. Sometimes maybe a third of the homeless shelter slots were empty, even when it gets cold in LA. So, the vacancy has always been a problem in LA shelters. People just don't want to go into these congregate shelters. In conversations I've seen between city council members at meetings, what people are really concerned about is hobo hot potato. If you are, say, in a wealthier part of town, you're a city council member who's saying, okay, I'm going to ban encampments in X, Y, and Z locations. Other city council members note that those homeless people end up in their districts instead, and they don't want to receive that. So really, to cover each other, they have to reserve some of these spaces. But again, with persistently high vacancy rates, it doesn't really seem like this reservation system is really causing a large impact. In fact, this report noted that half of the basic shelters accept people regardless of whether or not there's a reservation. So again, I don't really think this is having a huge impact based on even what this report says, although it does find issue with the program.
Los Angeles, the only place you have to have a reservation to be homeless. But one last question, Kenneth. Being a Los Angeles area resident, I've asked this of my other reporters that live in metropolitan areas around this situation. Over the past 5-6 years, have you seen homelessness get any better in terms of the number of people on the streets?
I've only seen it get worse, and I've seen the behavior that's tolerated get worse as well. I live in West Los Angeles. It's not a cheap area by any means. And there is a building across the street from me that's been undergoing renovations. It is one of those apartments where it's called a dingbat, where there's open parking on the bottom and space to live on top of that. So when one of these parking bays was under renovation and had been fixed up, and the spaces above it were still being gutted and renovated, there's no one parking in the space. So what happened was a homeless individual took a mattress that someone was about to throw away from another part of the block, dragged it into one of the empty spaces, and would get high and yell all day and all night for weeks.
Lovely.
And I would see this every single day as I walked in and out of my apartment.
Oh man, that is sad. But thank you. A very important story on this, though. Kenneth, thank you so much, and thanks for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.